It's loading. Is everyone ready? So I think we should be starting in a minute or so. Is everyone ready? All right, so here we go. Sat Sri Akal, everyone. I'm Sonia Dhami, and I'm joining you from Cupertino in California. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our fourth virtual tour of Sikh treasures from around the world. I trust you're all doing well and staying safe during these unbelievable times. We hope that this event today will help to take your mind off the pandemic that is unfortunately making a strong comeback in many parts of the world. So while you are doing your part by staying home, we are doing ours by bringing to you, in the comfort of your homes, Sikh history from all over the world. And these are treasures that we cherish. And this time we will travel to Pakistan. The dates of 14th and 15th August hold a special meaning for India and Pakistan, as it commemorates the independence from British rule. So I felicitate my friends in India and Pakistan on this occasion. But it is also a day that brings back the tragic memories of the partition of Punjab and the suffering of millions of refugees. And these are the aspects of history that we must learn from. And that is exactly what we are trying to do by bringing history to you and making it come alive through the arts. So before we get started today, and while people are joining in, we would like to introduce the Sikh Foundation to those of you who are not familiar with it through a short video. Soon after its establishment, the Sikh Foundation immersed itself in literary pursuits, publishing books and journals. But the course of history, set in motion in the Punjab in the 80s, engulfed all academic and artistic ambitions for now. The weekly newspaper, the Sikh Times, was launched in 1984. Full-page advertisements in leading American newspapers were published to educate Americans about Sikhs. Pioneering the display of Sikh arts, the first Sikh art exhibit opened in 1992 in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum. Another major initiative was the establishment of the Kundan Kaur Kapani Chair of Sikh and Punjabi Language Studies, the first of its kind at the University of California, Santa Barbara, commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Sikh Foundation. The first permanent Sikh art gallery was established at the Asian Art Museums in San Francisco in 2003. In all, 7 Sikh art exhibits supported by the foundation have been displayed at leading museums all over the world, including the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Smithsonian in DC, Rubin Museum of Art in New York, and the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. 3 chairs of Sikh studies set up by the Sikh Foundation at University of California campuses at Santa Barbara, Riverside, and Santa Cruz, and a Sikh studies program at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley are amongst the 6 endowed chairs and numerous programs running all over the United States with the support from the community. These chairs and programs create an enduring legacy, educating generations of students. With increasing number of scholars of Sikh studies, the field has expanded from religion and history to also include economics, conservation, and art. Continuing in our mission to create high-quality resources for the academic and artistic study of Sikhism, our latest publication, Sikh Arts from the Kapani Collection, co-published with the Smithsonian Institute, documents this unrivaled collection of art. As we look to the future, we think about new ways to maintain our connection with our past heritage so that our future generations can also be inspired, engaged, and educated all over the world. The Sikh Foundation has long worked for the promotion and preservation of Sikh arts around the world. The acclaimed Kapani collection of Sikh art has pioneered the development of the field of Sikh art, and it has also inspired collectors and historians. And all of this helps to connect us to our history and heritage, not only through books, but also drawing our focus to our material heritage. And this is the goal of this virtual shows, as well as to connect you to your history, which is not just in Punjab, but in so many other parts of the world. Today's presentation will be for about an hour, during which we will also take questions that you might have. Please do feel free to write your questions and comments in the chat window at any time during the presentation, and we will keep an eye out for them, and our experts will be happy to answer those at the end. And at this time, I do request for you to please share this live session by clicking the share button on your screens so that your friends can also join in. On today's trip, Mr. Jahandad Khan Tanoli will take us to his home region of Hazara in northeastern Pakistan. Jahandad is the 7th generation descendant of his namesake, who was a contemporary of General Hari Singh Nalwa, and were both foes and friends as history unfolded. He is a passionate history researcher, and one of his novel initiatives is the Indus Heritage Club, which connects Sikhs to our historical sites and monuments in Pakistan. Today, Jahandad will share with us facts from history about the legendary Sikh general Hari Singh Nalwa, while also looking at some not so well-known resources for this history, which have been somehow neglected or people do not know about. I had the pleasure of doing an actual tour with him in October last year, and I'm delighted to reconnect with him today. Welcome to the show, Jahandad. Where are you joining us from today?
Thank you, Sonia. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm joining you from Islamabad right now, and I'll be speaking about Hari Singh Nalwa's important but forgotten legacy in Hazara, which is the part of northwest Pakistan that my family belongs to, and where my ancestors had a complex relationship with Hari Singh Nalwa, which I think has lessons that are relevant for all of us today, and I'll be hoping to share some of those tonight.
Excellent. We really appreciate you joining at this late hour, because I think it's close to midnight in Islamabad at this time. So thank you very much. And today we are also very lucky to have another distinguished guest with us today, and that is Dr. Parvinderjit Singh Khanuja. I'm sorry, I should repeat the name. Dr. Parvinderjit Khanuja, a physician who is also an acclaimed collector of Sikh art. Now, while there are a number of collectors in the field of Sikh art today, which is awesome, but what distinguishes Dr. Khanuja is that he has already established a permanent Sikh art gallery at the Phoenix Museum of Art in Arizona, which is only one of only 2 such galleries in the Western world. And today, Dr. Khanuja will show us some masterpieces from his art collection, which are from the period of Hari Singh Nalwa during the Sikh period of from 1800 to 1847. So welcome to the show, Dr. Khanuja. And where are you joining us from?
Thank you, Sonia. I'm joining you from Phoenix, Arizona.
Wonderful. So Dr. Khanuja, as a collector, you have a unique insight, I would say, or benefit, advantage of literally experiencing history through the artifacts in your collection. And I think including some very exquisite pieces, some of which perhaps Hari Singh Nalwa might have actually touched with his hands or maybe personally used them as well. So experiencing these pieces and having an extensive having extensively read about his life, what is your understanding of what kind of a man was Hari Singh Nalwa?
You know, we can get the presentation and I can start explaining about him. Although I think the most of the presentation is on the Hazara region. So if I look into, he was just an amazing general, without which the Khalsa kingdom would never have been developed, or the Raj would not have been there. So if, starting on the presentation, Sonia, if that's okay with you.
Yes, absolutely. Please, I think it will be wonderful to learn about the man through the artwork that you have. So please, please do start.
Thank you. So my sincere thanks to Sikh Foundation for hosting this and also including me in this. And I would also like to credit Vineet Nalwa, whose book we have all read on Hari Singh Nalwa, her ancestor. Also, I would be remiss if I did not mention Dr. Kapani, who is a pioneer in the field of Sikh art and heritage for the last 50 years and is a role model for all of us. So I'll introduce Sardar Hari Singh Nalwa only briefly, since majority of the talk is on the Hazara region, where he spent a fair amount of time, and Jahandad will educate us about it. So this is a first day cover from 2013. And on the right side, which you don't see too well, is where Hari Singh Nalwa is seen in his armor, with his armored clothes. And on this side, what we see is the Jamrud fort at Khyber, where he died in 1837, unfortunately. So he was born in 1791 at Gujranwala. And mind you, Ranjit Singh is from the same place. However, there was an 11-year difference between the two of them. Gujranwala at that time was the capital of Sukracharya Misl. The family originated from Majita near Amritsar, and then they moved to Gujranwala. His grandfather, Hardas, died in 1762 against Abdali. His father, Gurdial Singh, went on campaigns with Charas Singh and Mahasingh Sukracharya, grandfather and father of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. His father died when Hari Singh Nalwa was only 7 years old. Subsequently, he moved to his maternal home, where he learned Gurmukhi, Pashto, and Persian became quite well educated. Also, he trained in riding, musketry, and swordsmanship. He took Pahal at the age of 10. In 1804, when he was 13, he was recruited in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's family. Of course, you are aware the name Nalwa was given by Maharaja Ranjit Singh to him. He became personal bodyguard to Maharaja Ranjit Singh. At the age of 14, he was given the title of Sardar and was in command of 800 soldiers. He was involved in the attack of the Battle of Kasur in 1807, which they were victorious. Subsequently, he fought in multiple battles, including Multan, Attock, Kashmir in 1819, and was governor of Kashmir from 1820 for nearly 2 years. So if we go to the next slide. So this is a painting I acquired from Dr. Gurpal Puller, and I want to give him credit for this. Dr. Gurpal Puller is an orthopedic surgeon from Virginia. He's also a pioneer in the Sikh Art collection, and he was kind enough to give me this painting along with some other works. So in this painting, on top is written in Devangiri. It's about 7 inches by 5 inches. In this painting, it was painted when Hari Singh Nalwa was in his 40s. We see a very pious, serene man with a very reflective and calm look. He spent a fair amount of his income, some say up to even 50%, giving grants and patronizing multiple religious places. He built a mosque in Gujranwala and Haripur. Haripur is the town he founded. He built gurdwaras in Kashmir, and some of you are aware that the 6th Guru, Guru Har Gobind Sahib, visited there, and there is a Chhemi Patshahi Gurdwara in Kashmir. He also built gurdwaras in Peshawar, and one of them is Pai Joga Gurdwara, which I have visited and is a functional gurdwara. He also built Gurdwara Panja Sahib in Hassan Abdal. Also, the gold on the dome of Shri Akal Takht Sahib was donated by him. If we go to the next slide. So this is one of the early sketches with gold dome of Shri Akal Takht Sahib. This is a lithograph by a lady published in 1854 in London. And you can see she's done an amazing job of sketching it quite well. And it looks beautiful. So that is what it looked like in 1854 or earlier than that. Hari Singh Nalwa, along with his other social causes, encouraged female literacy also. It is said that in Gujranwala, the female literacy was 3 times as much as compared to other regions in Punjab. So we go to the next slide. Hari Singh Nalwa, I'm sure, was a very rich man, and he could afford a lot of jewelry. So this is one of his pieces. It shows a necklace comprising of 2 strands of pearls with a large floral form pendant in the center and 10 smaller foliate pendants, each gem set on both the sides, 33.5 centimeters in size. Interestingly, Maharaja Ranjit Singh gave him a pearl necklace before his trip to Shimla in 1831, when he went to meet Lord Bentinck, who was the Governor General of India at that time, who also incidentally gave him a pearl necklace. So thank you for listening to that. And again, you can see on this, the beauty of this pearl necklace he was wearing. And surprisingly, as you are aware, men as well as women wore jewelry in those days. So maybe we'll try to get into that fashion sometime in the future for the guys.
Thank you, Dr. Khanuja. So the image on this slide is of Fort. Although the boundaries of Punjab have been in flux for centuries, this is a good representative symbol of where the plains of Punjab meet the mountains of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Afghanistan beyond. Just as the invaders, merchants, and artists who crossed Attock from the west left their mark on the plains of India for centuries, Hari Singh Nalwa, who invaded from the east, left a profound imprint on state and society on the frontier, and we'll be examining some of that today. So I felt this is a good representation of what we will be talking about today. So the region you can see on the map is Hazara in what is today Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan. Now, I want to clarify from the onset that Hari Singh Nalwa's legacy, geographic legacy, is much bigger than just this small confined space that you can see on the map. But the reason we are focusing on Hazara today is because I feel that Hari Singh Nalwa's tenure as the Jagirdar Governor of Hazara from 1822 to 37, 15-year tenure, has not received adequate scholarly attention. Whereas we all know about Nalwa's fantastic military accomplishments, I feel that by understanding his tenure as a Jagirdar governor, we also begin to understand him as a diplomat, as a competent administrator, and as a person as well. Our guidebook for today's discussion is an important but forgotten book known as the Tawarikh-e-Hazara, written in Persian by Lala Mehtab Singh in 1846. Mehtab Singh hailed from Kanpur in UP, and he served under Nalwa for over 20 years as his administrative clerk on the northwest frontier. This book contains very important first-hand accounts of history as it unfolded back then. And it's important to mention that this book has not received adequate scholarly attention also in modern books that have been published on Nalwa. So I felt it's very important to bring this book to the limelight as an important primary account of events that took place at that time. Just a brief introduction. Hari Singh Nalwa was the commander-in-chief of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Lahore Durbar, who has to his credit the westward expansion of the Lahore Durbar till the Khyber Pass. He was born in the city of Gujranwala in 1791 to an aristocratic family. He joined Maharaja Ranjit Singh's service at the age of 14. For those planning to visit Pakistan, Gujranwala is a 2-hour drive from Lahore, and you can still find Hari Singh Nalwa and Maharaja Ranjit Singh's birthplaces there, although unfortunately Hari Singh Nalwa's home has been encroached upon. So this is the building Hari Singh Nalwa was born in Gujranwala. Today it functions as a school of religious education for kids. However, it remains open to visitors, and you can still see the room that Hari Singh Nalwa was born in over there, but you'll need a reliable local guide to get you there because the city, due to urbanization, the old landmarks are very hard to find. Now, before getting into the main topic of today's virtual tour, I'd also highly recommend those considering a visit to Pakistan to stop by Hari Singh Nalwa's Haveli at Khatas Raj, which is close to halfway between Nankana Sahib and Panja Sahib. The fort-like Haveli is a very So the fort-like Haveli is a very imposing structure, and it exists in excellent condition even today. This was built by Nalwa in 1819 after he was handed over administrative control of the region, of the salt mines in the very difficult region. And it functioned as a forward base for Hari Singh Nalwa back then. So this is a highly recommended place to stop by once one is driving from Nankana Sahib to Panja Sahib. So, unlike Khatas Raj and Gujranwala, Hazara is a place that very few Sikh travelers to Pakistan visit, even though it's very close to Gurdwara Panja Sahib and is important from a 19th century Sikh political history perspective. Hazara, we need to understand, was the preferred route for Afghan Duranis to travel from Peshawar to Kashmir. Kashmir, as we all know, was a very important source of wealth for the Duranis. And when Maharaja Ranjit Singh conquered Kashmir in 1819, securing Hazara became very important so that the Afghans could not use it to retake Kashmir. It's important to understand this because it helps into perspective the political importance of Hazara in the conflict between the Sikh and Durrani empires. Now, since the early years, the Lahore Durbar faced resistance in Hazara, not from the Durrani Afghans, but from the local tribes who were used to maintaining their political independence, not just from the Lahore Durbar, but from the Durrani Afghans as well. To illustrate, in 1803, Haji Wahab, who was a tax collector of the Durrani Empire, was killed in Hazara when he attempted to tax the region. Similarly, in 1819 and 1820, when we see the Lahore Durbar attempting to tax the region, Makhan Singh, Diwan Ramdayal, and Amar Singh Majethia were killed in Hazara. Now, it's important to view the conflict in this taxation perspective, because even scholars of the stature of Hari Ram Gupta have, for example, attributed the conflict in Hazara to quote unquote the religious bigotry of the natives. And I feel it's very important to decolonize these narratives and examine the political economy of the conflict for what it was. Now, after experiencing the early setbacks in Hazara, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the Lahore Durbar experienced a stunning victory in 1821 when Hari Singh Nalwa defeated an army of tribesmen that was 3 to 5 times larger than his small force that was merely traveling through Hazara on their way from Kashmir. This battle took place at a place known as Mangal on the outskirts of the modern-day city of Abbottabad. And the battle took place when a large body of Jadoon tribesmen intercepted Nalwa and demanded Pashmina shawls as toll tax before allowing him to proceed. And we know from Mehtab Singh's Tawarikh-e-Hazara that Nalwa sent his local allies, Najibullah Khan Swati and Lala Raj Kanwar, to parley with the tribesmen 3 times, letting them know that he was not there to fight, but just meant to pass through the region. So he attempted 3 times, and when the negotiations failed, we know that Nalwa stormed the fort at Mangal by surprise and took the tribesmen by surprise. It was a very large group of tribesmen, and he conquered the fort at Mangal, and the tribesmen were evicted from the region and only allowed to resettle after they paid a hefty fine to the Lahore Durbar. Dr. Khanuja will have more to share on the precious shawls from Kashmir that were in such high demand later. This place is what modern-day Mangal looks like. We don't know exactly where the battle took place, but it was most likely the place that you can see in this photo. Another important battle that took place in Hazara took place in 1824 at a place known as Sirikot. A confederation of Mashwani, Dilazak, Tanoli, Tareen, and Jadoon tribesmen confronted the Lahore Durbar in a tough battle in which Nalwa received a serious head injury. Maharaja Ranjit Singh had to himself participate in the campaign, and the campaign was secured when some of these leading chiefs, tribal chiefs from Hazara, were captured and blown away by cannons. And these include Bostan Khan Tareen, Sher Muhammad Khan, Saleh Muhammad Mashwani, Salim Shah Maswani, and Jalal Khan Dilazak, and Sheikha Jadoon of Rajoia. Some of the chiefs who were blown away by cannons. And after this incident in 1824, the urban regions of Hazara were largely settled by the Lahore Durbar, and there were no large-scale revolts until 1846 in the urban regions of Hazara. Here's a photo of modern-day Sirikot. This is where the battle took place in 1824. This is a photo taken in 1905 of a body of Mashwani tribesmen standing next to the ruins of Sirikot fort with their nishan or war banner. Now, nishan, as we all know, has religious connotations among Sikhs, but on the frontier, it's used as a marker of political identity, with each clan or tribe carrying its own nishan to war, and you can tell the nishans apart from their distinct floral patterns. Now, despite these successes, and despite the fact that after 1824, the urban regions of Hazara posed no serious challenge to the Lahore Durbar, there are various independent accounts from that time period that suggest that Nalwa faced an active insurgency at the hands of my 7th generation ancestor, Painda Khan Tanoli, in the Trans-Indus Tanawal region of Western Hazara, till his very death, till Nalwa's death. In fact, if you read the Umdatul Tarikh in 1836, the Maharaja Ranjit Singh even used very harsh language against Nalwa because he was unable to put my ancestor to defeat, despite enjoying a great military advantage over him. Basically, what I'm trying to say here through this slide is that although the urban regions of Hazara were settled by Nalwa in 1824, till the very end, there was a large section of Hazara that remained politically volatile even throughout Nalwa's 15-year tenure as governor, Jagirdar governor. And if you read the independent accounts from the Times of London, Alexander Burns, Charles von Hugel, and Sohanlal Suri, you can find this. This can be corroborated from these accounts as well. Now, if we discuss Nalwa's military presence in Hazara, he managed around 80 forts and had around 4,000 men in Hazara. And a large number of these 80 forts were mud structures known as gadis that were situated at strategic hilltops and small passes and along the river Indus, as I mentioned earlier, to prevent the Durrani Afghans from, so they had a dual purpose, both to maintain law and order among the local tribes and also to prevent the Durrani Afghans from using Hazara as a transit point, which is why a large number of these forts were built along the river Indus, because that's where the Durranis would cross from back then. Now, in today's virtual tour, I would like to direct your attention to two forts from the Sikh period that survive in Hazara till today, but very few people know about, unfortunately. The Harkishangarh fort was built by Nalwa in 1822 when he laid the foundations of the city of Haripur in Hazara. Unfortunately, the fort is not in great condition today, as is evident from the photo. However, due to its proximity to Gurdwara Panja Sahib, it should get more visitors. And part of what we're doing here today is also building awareness on the vast Sikh heritage in Pakistan, which includes religious sites, but also includes important political landmarks like the one you can see in this photo. If these places get more visitors, they will be developed sooner, and there's a good chance that they will be rehabilitated. The other fort I want to talk about is the Shergarh Fort in Upper Hazara, which was built by Diwan Bhavani Das after the takeover of Kashmir in 1819. Based on my family's oral traditions, the fort changed hands 17 times between the Lahore Durbar and my ancestor, Painda Khan Tanoli, between 1824 and 1844. In 1860, my ancestor Nawab Akram Khan converted the Shergarh fort into a Haveli, as is evident from the fresco work and rich woodwork you can see in this photo. My family continues to cherish the Sikh heritage and the Sikh past of this Haveli. In February 2019, we commemorated the Haveli's 200th birthday by welcoming a group of Sikh friends from California, because we felt it's so important to celebrate these landmarks as our collective South Asian heritage that we should all be proud of. Now, a very good question that arises is, as I mentioned earlier, there were 80 forts in Hazara that Nalwa managed. So where did the rest of the forts go? We've mentioned only two notable forts that survive today. And I felt Bharukot Fort is a good example to illustrate what went wrong or what happened to these forts eventually. Bharukot remains submerged by the river Indus for 9 months a year now. Now, in this photo, you can see the remains of Bharukot Fort. After the Sikh defeat in the First Anglo-Sikh War, the British destroyed the vast majority of the forts held by the Lahore Durbar, so they could not be put to military use again. In this slide, you can see a sketch or a painting of James Abbott, who was the first colonial administrator of Hazara. Now, in his diary, Abbott admits that while passing the fort of Bharukot, on its surrender, he was obliged to destroy the fort and reduce it to a garrison of mere 15 persons, and the rest of the fort was destroyed. And so around this time, we see most of the Sikh era forts disappearing because they were simply reduced to rubble by the colonial administrators. After independence, Pakistan built a huge dam in Hazara on the river Indus. So a lot of the forts that were situated along the river Indus were subsequently submerged. And Bharukot is a good example of those. As I mentioned earlier, today it remains submerged for about 9 months every year. Now, having discussed Hari Singh Nalwa's military legacy, I think it's important to also shed some light on Hari Singh Nalwa's immense legacy in Hazara as a diplomat, as a skilled diplomat. Unfortunately, this is a side of his personality that has become overshadowed as we focus only on his military accomplishments. Now, the British often try to take credit for converting the lawless frontier regions into settled areas by co-opting local elites into their systems of governance. In the colonial era, Hazara had a total of 125 jagirs or political pensions that were given out by the British. However, very few people today are aware that out of the 125 jagirs in Hazara, 101 were merely continuations of jagirs that had been given out by Hari Singh Nalwa to the leading tribal chiefs of Hazara to win them over. This is often a point that we miss out when we view Nalwa as someone who only secured military victories in this region. In addition to the Jagirs, while governor of Hazara, Nalwa actively assigned 61 religious grants to religious institutions and gave about 106 grants to develop orchards and gardens in Hazara as well. Now, to illustrate the political impact of Nalwa's administrative reforms in Hazara, I want to fast forward to 10 years after Nalwa's death in 1847, when after the defeat of the Lahore Durbar in the First Anglo-Sikh War, Hazara was turned over to the Dogra rulers along with Kashmir. And at that time, because Hazara was more politically turbulent than Kashmir, the British sent a fact-finding team to Hazara, headed by Henry Lumsden and Peter Vance Agnew, to ask the locals, what needs to be done to successfully transfer control of Hazara over to the Dogras. And the quote you can see here is what the fact-finding team reported back to Peshawar, which is that the people are all willing to tender allegiance to Maharaja Gulab Singh on his guaranteeing to them what they held in the time of Sardar Hari Singh. So I think this is testament to Hari Singh Nalwa's political and administrative skills as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my ancestor Painda Khan had been a bitter rival of Nalwa for more than a decade, when due to circumstances, he found himself asking Nalwa for military assistance against Sayyid Ahmad Barelvi, who was an angry preacher from UP who tried to unite the Pashtun tribes in the Khyber region in a religious war against Maharaja Ranjit Singh. However, the tribes had a falling out with Barelvi when they realized that the version of Islam he preached was at odds with the folk Islam that we had been practicing for centuries. My ancestor Painda Khan felt he had no other option than to ask Nalwa for assistance against Barelvi. Nalwa responded by agreeing to help Painda Khan on the condition that he would send his son, my namesake and sixth generation ancestor Jahandad Khan, to Nalwa as a political prisoner as a guarantee of goodwill in return for Nalwa's help. The exchange between the two former enemies was noted down in our region by village bards in high Urdu poetry, and I would like to share with the audience today some of this poetry. It's important to understand these may or may not be their actual words, but this is how our tribe, my people, documented the exchange. So on the right here, you can see my great-grand uncle Abdullah Khan Tanoli from the 1840s. This is an early sketch. This is what my folks looked like back in the day. And so my ancestor Painda Khan wrote to Nalwa saying, "Tu sardar hai aur main farman pazir, tu daulat-e-maab aur main miskin fakir. सुना होगा किस्सा मेरा सर बसर हुआ किस तरह वक्त ज़ेरो वजीर ना लश्कर रहा और ना असबाब माल ना इज्जत ना हुर्मत ना जाहो जलाल खलीफा ने नीचा दिखाया मुझे." खलीफा ही इज रेफरिंग टू सैयद अहमद बरेलवी. खलीफा ने नीचा दिखाया मुझे, जमाने ने क्या क्या सताया मुझे, निहायत हजी हूं निहायत तबाह, नहीं जस तेरे कोई जाए पनाह, नहीं जस तेरे कोई बाए पनाह, you are my only source of refuge now. कमक को मेरी भेज जंगी सिपाह, कमक means help, so कमक को मेरी भेज जंगी सिपाह, रहूंगा हमेशा तेरा नेक ख्वाह means well wisher. डगेगा ना राहे वफा से कदम, डगेगा ना राहे वफा से कदम, I will always stay on the path of your loyalty. फिरेगा ना खते दुआ से कलम, and my pen will forever write prayers in your praise. गुज़िश्ता जो किस्सा है दिल से भुला, the past stories, please remove them from your heart. Whatever happened or whatever history we had between us, please remove that. So he says, गुज़िश्ता जो किस्सा है दिल से भुला, मेरी कजरदी तू ज़बां पर न ला, and don't discuss my wrongdoings, all the wrong that I have done you. धर्म ना खरीदा समझना गुलाम, लिखूं और क्या बस फकत ओ सलाम. So this is Painda Khan's request to Nalwa for assistance against Sayyid Ahmad Barelvi. And Hari Singh Nalwa responded to my ancestor Painda Khan by saying, "ए खान पाइंदा गमगीन न हो, खुदा पर नजर कर के खुद बीन न हो, यूं ही है नसीबो फराजे जहां, कभी आसमान है कभी रसीमा, मगर मर्द को अज़म दरकार है, हर हाल हिम्मत सजादार है. नहीं है कमक से मुझे इनहराफ, नहीं है कमक से मुझे इनहराफ. Kamak means help and inharaf means issue. So he says, I don't have any issue with helping you. लेकिन बात सुन ले मेरी साफ साफ कि अपने जहांदाद फरजंद को, फरजंद मीन्स एल्डेस्ट सन, कि अपने जहांदाद फरजंद को यहाँ भेज दे मुद्दत चंद को, मुद्दत चंद शॉर्ट ड्यूरेशन. बरस में गिरवा वो रहे मेरे पास, इफ ही स्टेज विद मी एज अ पॉलिटिकल प्रिजनर, कि हम तुम रहें रोज और शब बेहिरास, so that you and I may remain day and night without suspicion of each other. यकीन जानना जब वो आया यहाँ, उसी वक्त कर दूंगा लश्कर रवां. पिसर को ना भेजा अगर ए ना बदार, if you, पिसर means son, तो फिर किसकी फौज और कहाँ का एतवार. So using this, I just want to elaborate on this a bit. This illustrates to me all the grace and dignity with which my ancestors, my family, despite being rivals of Hari Singh Nalwa in the region, continue to remember him till today. I want to mention here that my tribe at that time lost 12,000 people, and we're not a big, numerically a very big tribe, but we know that in a span of 20 years, we lost 12,000 warriors fighting against Nalwa. But in all the historical discourse that continues still today, you see a lot of dignity and grace when we discuss this conflict. And this is in stark contrast to literature that emerges in the colonial era, which tries to portray Hari Singh Nalwa as a tyrant, as someone who was religiously persecuting the Muslims of the region. And if you examine these primary texts that our tribes carry, you see that we had a very different perspective. Although we acknowledge the rivalry and the enmity and the violence that existed, we discussed about our rivalry, or when we talked about this history, it was in very different terms than the one you see emerging in colonial literature. I'd like to now talk a bit about Nalwa's economic legacy in Hazara. Now, although the British introduced canal irrigation to Punjab on an unprecedented scale, they were certainly not the pioneers of the idea. Before Hari Singh Nalwa laid down the foundations of Haripur in 1822, he developed a complex canal system there known as the Rangila Canal that leveraged water from 5 streams for irrigation and played a very important role in the setting up of orchards, fruit orchards in Lower Hazara. These fruit orchards continue to be a very important part of the local economy in Hazara even today. Due to the affluence generated by modern day agriculture, a large number of Khatri merchants settled in Hazara during Hari Singh Nalwa's tenure. But I want to mention that Khatri communities had been residing in Hazara since before the Lahore Durbar took the region, because one of my ancestors settled the first Khatri communities in Hazara in the 1760s so that they could contribute to the local economy, so that the local economy could develop more. And so we had Khatris residing since before in the Tanawal region in Hazara, but in the Lahore Durbar's time, we see a much more massive influx, and those communities continue to reside there till the time of partition. Now, one theme I would like to discuss is, was it a religious war? Now, I would like to introduce 3 points here that would definitely confuse anyone who thinks that the conflict between the Lahore Durbar between Maharaja Ranjit Singh and Muslim tribes was religiously motivated, as suggested by Hari Ram Gupta. Firstly, as early as May 1820, we see the Sikh Thanedar of Rawalpindi, whose name was Nand Singh, join forces with the Muslim tribes of Hazara when he fell out of favor with Maharaja Ranjit Singh. This is from the Umdat-ul-Tarikh, by the way. Similarly, in 1832, when my ancestor Painda Khan Tanoli attacked the Sikh fort in the city of Mansehra in northern Hazara, we see him confronting a Muslim army over there that was headed by Saddam Khan Jahangiri, who was the Muslim mayor of Mansehra city, appointed by Hari Singh Nalwa. And when Saddam Khan Jahangiri, or the Muslim mayor of Mansehra, was slain by my ancestor, Nalwa very generously rewarded his family by assigning to them Jagirs. And the third point I would like to bring up is that a very large portion of the 4,000 men who were stationed as part of the Lahore Durbar's forces in Hazara were Punjabi Muslims, and they were very well represented both in infantry as well as artillery. So what I'm trying to say here is that the above or the points I just mentioned would have been hard if the conflict had very strong religious undertones. That said, a point I would like to mention is that during Hari Singh Nalwa's time, a ban on the Muslim call to prayer was imposed in Hazara, as well as and also a ban on the slaughter of cows and for beef. And so this was most probably taken to appease orthodox elements at the Lahore Durbar at Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court. However, these policies are cited today as examples of religious discrimination. Now, one point that emerges is which was the moral armies. We see various armies competing in Hazara, right? There's my folks, the local tribes. We see the Afghan Duranis. We see the Lahore Durbar. We see outsiders like Sayyid Ahmad Barelvi. So Hazara there was all kinds of a realpolitik. It was like a Cold War kind of situation going on back then. So a point that emerges is which was the moral army. And the point I would like to make here when I say this is that those were very unforgiving times, and the rules of engagement back then were very different from what we have today. So when we study the conflict in Hazara in the early 19th century, it needs to be seen from that perspective. Now, that said, I would like to say that back then, a distinction between non-combatants and combatants was not really made the same way that modern armies abide by today. So for example, plundering non-combatants was considered fair game by all parties. Now, if I talk about just my ancestor, Painda Khan Tanoli, for example, he considered it fair to abduct rich merchants and for ransom, and sometimes he would throw them into the river Indus even after collecting ransom from their families. We know that the Duranis, when they were ruling the region, they imposed very high taxation, both on Kashmir and whatever parts of Hazara they could tax. In fact, one of my ancestors, Nawab Khan Tanoli, was the ancestor of Painda Khan, was killed by Azim Khan Durani due to one such exchange. We similarly see that when Sayyid Ahmad Barelvi came to the northwest frontier, he plundered the town of Hazro near Hazara, which was a hub of commerce. Similarly, when the Lahore Durbar took over Peshawar in 1834, we see the orchards and all the commerce in the very important city being turned into ruins because a lot of plundering went on. So what I'm trying to say here today is that all of these things, all of these excesses would be considered human rights abuses today, but we need to examine them in the perspective of the early 19th century conflict that they took place in. One addition point I would like to make is that there is often in books on the internet, we see this narrative being repeated again and again that Pashtun women used to be scared of Nalwa, and they would warn their kids at night that go to sleep or else Hari Singh Nalwa will come. Now I can't verify or deny it. I haven't heard it today. Maybe it happened back in the 1860s, 70s, God knows. But based on my research, there might be one incident which can be the root of this, and I'll take you back to 1821. To the fort of Shinkiari in northern Hazara, which was a small Sikh garrison. And we know that the Swati tribe that resided in northern Hazara at that time overran the Shinkiari fort in 1821. And about 150 Hindu and Sikh women who were residing inside the fort were taken prisoners. We are told that they were forcibly converted and married off to tribesmen as well. And Hari Singh Nalwa, when he found out about this, from Harirpur, he launched a lightning raid on the Bugarmang glens in northern Hazara. So at a different part of northern Hazara, he launched these lightning raids, and he took about 1,000 local women and kids as prisoners and brought them with him to Harirpur. And about 3 months later, exchange of prisoners took place in which the 150 to 200 Sikh and Hindu women were swapped with the Muslim women who were taken prisoners, and both sides took their women back. Now, the larger point I want to make here is that this was violence that was taking place on women. And these are not narratives that should be glorified. And I think had our historians encouraged a culture of introspection and critical thinking, instead of just chest thumping to half-truths, a repeat of the violence on women at the time of partition could have been avoided. So this is just one point I want to make when we discuss whether or not Pashtun women were scared of Nalwa or not. Without taking sides, I would like to say that the violence on women in war, both by the tribesmen and by the Lahore Durbar, is something that we should not be proud of and something we should critically examine today for our future as well. The photo you can see in this slide are the seals of Hari Singh Nalwa on the left. In the center, you can see the seal of Mahan Singh Mirpuri, who was Hari Singh Nalwa's lieutenant in Hazara. And on the right, you can see the seal of my ancestor, Jahandad Khan Tanoli, who was a rival of, who was a contemporary of Hari Singh Nalwa and Mahan Singh back then. My final slide is on the need to decolonize history. As I mentioned earlier, in the colonial period, we see a lot of texts that label the Lahore Darbar's period in Hazara, not just in Hazara, but all over the regions, all over Punjab, gets labeled as a time of religious bigotry that was implemented on the Muslim population of Punjab. As we saw, if we examine pre-colonial literature, we see that the reality is always far more complex than these simplistic narratives promoted under colonial rule. And I feel that translating the Tawarikh-e-Hazara by Mehtab Singh in 1846 can play a very key role in decolonizing this history, because it gives us access to those pre-colonial records that illustrate the very complex relationship that took place between Nalwa and my ancestors and the local tribes of Hazara. Another book I would mention is the Tarikh-e-Tanolian, which is based on my tribe's experience in the early, between 1820 and 1850. Again, this shows a far more complex relationship than the binary black and white relationships or the black and white histories promoted under colonial rule. As Dr. Khanuja mentioned earlier, Champion of the Khalsa Ji by Vineet Nalwa is an excellent and very well researched account of Hari Singh Nalwa's rule over the region. And I find myself referring to this book again and again, just because of how well researched it is. Lastly, I would mention the Gazetteer of Hazara for those who want to do a deep dive into some of the administrative reforms taken by Nalwa. This was written in 1883 within living memory of the Lahore Durbar. So I find it, semi-useful as well. That's all from my end, Ji. And hopefully you found it to be, I'm hoping that all those listening today found information that can lead them to do more research on the Lahore Darbar's footprint in the region. And if there are any people who would like to assist with the translation of important primary texts that exist till today in Hazara, in Persian and in Urdu, I can, my contact information will be available in a later slide, or you can get in touch with the Sikh Foundation and they can contact me, because I think this is something very important. The need to decolonize history, never before has it been more important. That's all from my end.
Wah, Jahandad, wah. Kabhi asman hai, kabhi pasan. What a beautiful line. And the verses that you recited have brought the personalities of your ancestor, namesake Jahandad Khan and Hari Singh Nalwa alive for us. And that was an animated moment. So thank you so much for this phenomenal presentation. It gave us a multifaceted insight into Hari Singh Nalwa's role in Hazara. And it's almost getting as close a first-hand experience as is possible, hearing this story from you. And you also talked about the book by Mehtab Singh, Lala Mehtab Singh, and I hope someone from the audience will be motivated to undertake the translation. It would be such a service, so thank you for sharing that also particularly. And you did briefly touch upon the forts that were built during the Sikh period. And I do want to let our audience know that our next show will be on September 5th with Amardeep Singh. And he's a pioneering researcher on Sikh heritage in Pakistan who has really revived and catalyzed this interest in Sikh heritage. And that he will be covering the Sikh historical forts in Pakistan. So that's a whole hour devoted just to the forts. So please do mark your calendars for this show as well. And Jahandad mentioned about the Battle of Mangal, which was in 1821, and in which the tribal chiefs had demanded tribute in the form of Pashmina shawls. So what are these precious shawls that were literally treated as a currency in those days? So we are fortunate that Dr. Khanuja's extensive collection of Sikh art also includes over 30 pieces of these magnificent shawls, especially those from the Sikh period, which I'm so excited to see myself. So Dr. Khanuja, the stage is yours now.
Thank you, Sonia ji, and awesome, Jahandad. Thank you. So Kashmiri shawls, the Pashmina shawls, played a major role in the Khalsa Durbar. And I'm sure most of you are aware of that. And they were favored by Sikh nobility. They used to be given for gifts. Men and women would wear them. They were even put on horses and also on the floors and in their darbars. General Eller, the French general in the Khalsa Raj, used to send them to France, and so did the other generals. They also were exported to Russia. We have some exported shawls to Russia with a Russian export stamp on them, and they were highly desired. So to put things into perspective, in 1805, during the Afghan rule in Kashmir, there were 21,000 manufacturing shops of these shawls. In 1819, still the Afghani rule, that number had dwindled down to 6,000. The rest had moved to Punjab primarily, and there was now shawl production in Amritsar, Lahore, and Ludhiana. And the reason they had moved were more economic reasons. So in 1821, when Hari Singh was the governor of Kashmir, that number had gone up again from 6,000 to 16,000 shops who were manufacturing. Primarily around Srinagar, that was occurring because of the economic reasons. So as you see this book, it's by Frank Ames. He's based in New York, although I spent a fair amount of time in India. So Frank Ames has published 2 books in Kashmiri shawls. He's an authority on it. He's divided them based on the rulers, Mughal, Afghan, Sikh, and Dogras. So you would say, why is he doing that? Because there was a difference. What most don't realize, that there was a marked change of shawls during Sikh period. So let us examine a few to appreciate the differences. So this is from the Afghan period. So these are Kashmiri shawls. They're not embroidered. There is twill tapestry in them. And this is a very beautiful, delicate shawl. They're quite large in size, 9 feet by 4.5 feet. Mostly they were worn by men, but women would wear it too. But mostly by men because of the size. So this shawl is from 1790 to 1810. Size is 9 feet, 4.5 feet. It has 10 bottes or vases, as you'll see at the end with radial flowers. The middle part is relatively quite open. So you'll see that, and it's free open, and we'll see afterwards how it changes. So this is the botte part, and you can see how beautifully they have done the tapestry on it. It has radial flowers in it and is truly delicate. So we go to the next slide. So this is a masterpiece of the Sikh art. So this is probably from 1835. So this is about 10 feet by 4.25 feet. Likely 1835, called the Sikh High Period. It is very different from the previous one, as you can appreciate. The middle portion, the open space, is relatively very small compared to the previous ones. Now, Frank Ames believes that those thick bands you saw were like the rivers of Punjab. And there was a dramatic sweep of tall skeletal hooked bottes. So those are like the rivers of Punjab. So we go to the next one, and you see these buildings. So these buildings are possibly temples in the center with chhatri, and they're very colorful and alive, multiple colors, and look at the delicate work. unfortunately, this technique is no longer available. We'll go to the next shawl. And this is again also from the Sikh period, 1835. Similar size, 10 feet by 4¼ feet. And it is worn primarily by men. So there are 4 tall bottes or vases you'll see at the end, and they're sort of curved. And that was quite characteristic of the Sikh period. They have multiple colors, saffron, yellow, teal, and many more. So if you look at the colors, they're just amazing how many colors they have fit in there. Saffron, yellow, teal, and again, many others. There are like, you'll see leaf-like patterns, peacock fans you'll see. So if you can imagine, even Frank Ames says these are like Diwali patterns. You see those patterns there, like fireworks. So could it have been done to celebrate Diwali? We'll never know, but again, another masterpiece. This is similar to another piece in the Tapi collection in Gujarat. So these Sikh period shawls are very unique. They're likely influenced by the rulers, which were the Sikhs at that time. So we go to the next one. So this is called a moon shawl. This is from around 1860. It is smaller in size, 6 feet by 6 feet, mostly worn by women. So there's a moon in the middle and there's quarter of a moon at the edges, if you'll see that. So there's a central moon, and these were, the moon shawl started to come in the late 1700s. We have in a collection one of the earliest ones available. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see a central sunburst medallion with bent tip bottes. You'll see them. And this shawl at present actually is hanging at Phoenix Art Museum in their Indian fashion exhibit at this time. So we go to the next one. This is another shawl, and this is from 1835 to 1840. It is square. It is called a Ramal, 5¼ by 5¼ feet. And again, this is worn by women. So you'll see a large contrast. There's a black square in the middle with 4 pairs of opposing, like peacocks carrying baskets of flowers. I mean, you have to start imagining some things, makes that easier. And if Sonia will show the next one, and you'll appreciate the amazing work. This is again not embroidery, but just an amazing technique these people had, and it would take them 6 months to a year to even do one shawl sometimes. So next year, we plan to have an exhibit at Phoenix Art Museum, along with the publication on textiles of Punjab, which will be Kashmir shawls, fulkaris, Shamba rumals, Rumal sahibs that we have in a collection. And this is just a sampling of the ones which I'm glad to share with you. Sonia?
Sonia, your mic is muted. Please unmute it.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Jahandad. Thank you, Dr. Khanuja. Not many people know even today all that you have shared about the Kashmiri shawls. And I think they are still an object of great desire and aspiration for many women today as well. And these are such magnificent pieces. And I hope people noted that the length of these shawls is not what we have today. These are 10 feet longs. And so if people are wondering how were they worn, then I would remind them of the iconic portrait of Maharaja Dalip Singh, which is painted by Franz Winterhalter for the Queen of England. And in where you see Dalip Singh draped with a shawl. So it was like a loose garment worn around the body, and not just the way that we use shawls for warmth today. And another reason for this extraordinary length of 10 feet was also because these pieces were also used to line tents and cover floors, etc. I've read that Maharaja Ranjit Singh's tent during the Roper Agreement with the British, in which Hari Singh Nalwa played a major role, as you mentioned, is described as having walls and floors covered with Pashmina shawls. So once again, I thank you so much for sharing these extraordinary pieces from your collection. And I believe that you are doing a form of seva to the community by contributing and by collecting and preserving these pieces of our history, and also so graciously sharing them with us. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you, Dr. Khanuja.
So, there's an old phrase which says, if you haven't seen Lahore, you have not been born. I know some of you might want to disagree with that, but Jahandad is a Shahjada of the Tanoli tribe. They had actually their own sort of a state or a country called the province. So if you want to go to Pakistan, and I don't call it Pakistan, I call it Lenda Punjab. So if you want to go there and visit 4 to 5 gurdwaras, you can do it on your own or with anybody. However, agar tusi apni rooh nu jagana hai, then you have to visit more than the 4 to 5 gurdwaras, right? So my family originally came from Jhelum and Kabul. I have been with Jahandad's group, which is the Indus Heritage Club, and he's doing us a major service with this, twice over the last 2 years in Lenda, Punjab. And I consider Hazara at one time to be part of that Punjab because it was part of the Khalsa Darbar. So besides the regular Gurdwara, and I want to spend a minute on my experience there so people can appreciate it. So beside the regular Gurdwaras, our experience was going to Mia Mir, Bulle Shah, Baba Farid Dargahs. What an experience. With the Qawwali programs, some of them even very done privately. Also, having the best poets of Lahore come in and do their shairi with us, and also plays in Lahore. A night singing program at Sheesh Mahal in Lahore Fort, which is a UNESCO heritage site, and again also at Taxila Museum and the stupa there, again a UNESCO heritage site. Going to places like Pahi Bano, Gurdwara, and Bhuman Shah, and the frescoes are unbelievable because you will not find them in the Charda Punjab at this time. They're only existing in the Lenda Punjab, for now at least, till other people encroach and get rid of them. So I just wanted to say that the experience in this Punjab is really awakening your ruh. And from my side and from the group which went with us, Jahandad is doing us a major, major service by creating this Indus Heritage Group and customizing the trip to our needs. So we thank him for that, and also from the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khanuja, for the shout out for Indus Heritage Club. I have also enjoyed and completely engaged with the heritage in Pakistan during my trip with Jahandad, and I will completely vouch for all that you have said. So this brings us to our question time, Q&A. We are running over our schedule at the moment, so we'll be able to take up maybe 1 or 2 questions. I will share these, and whoever is comfortable to answer this, please go ahead. One of the questions we had is from Jaspreet Kaur, and she is curious to know that are there any writings by Hari Singh Nalwa? He was a literate man, you mentioned. He was well versed in Persian as well as Gurmukhi. And I believe probably English as well, because he was chosen to head the group that went to Shimla to make arrangements for the agreement with the British. So do we have any writings by Hari Singh Nalwa? Jahandad, would you like to take that?
Thanks, Sonia. It's a very interesting question. I think there are two parts to this question that I'd like to answer. First is, these people like Lala Mehtab Singh were administrative clerks for Nalwa. Nalwa was all over the frontier, and he had these scribes who on a day-to-day basis were recording things that took place. And so most of what we know about Nalwa is from those sources, from those Khalsa Darbar sources. There are in existence, the documents he signed, but those are very administrative in nature. I would not say that those are narrative documents. Most of the narratives we have are from sources other than Nalwa himself, but sources from within the Khalsa Darbar records, as well as oral traditions. One other point I would like to mention though here is that our knowledge about the Lahore Darbar is, our existing knowledge, I would say, is only 50% of what it should be. This would come as surprising to some people, but if you visit Anarkali's tomb in Lahore, you would find bags and bags full of the Khalsa Lahore Darbar record in Persian that are lying around over there in Anarkali's tomb even today. They have not been translated. We don't know what's inside all of those. And so does it contain records from Nalwa himself? Maybe, I can't say. But this underscores the importance of us making an effort to go back to those primary sources. It won't be easy. It requires a lot of logistics. There's a lot of Persian translation work that needs to be done. But who knows what could be there inside the records inside Anarkali's tomb in Lahore that continue till today. And there are just bastas and bastas full of Persian records from the Lahore Durbar over there.
Thank you, Jahandad. Dr. Khanuja, I know you have an extensive book collection as well. So is there something that you have come across which is by Hari Singh Nalwa?
I don't have anything specifically as far as I know by Hari Singh Nalwa. I do have a book which I got from England about 8-9 years ago at an auction. And it was the history of Punjab with a focus to the Sikh period. But again, it's in Persian or Kashmiri. So I have not had it translated yet, but it is a challenge. So we hope there is more description to it. It has some paintings in it too, watercolor paintings, about 5 of them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have another question, which I think, Jahandad, you did partly cover about any references for further reading on Hari Singh Nalwa. This is a question from Arshnur Olak, and he mentions about a book by somebody from Kanpur, but he's asking if there are other books that you would refer as well.
I think the level of depth Vaneet Nalwa has gone into in her book is unprecedented. I would, a lot of those, she even to her credit has consulted sources that are in Pakistan and not available to scholars in India. So to all the audiences today, I would recommend starting off with Vaneet Nalwa's Champion of the Khalsa Ji. It's in English, it's available on Amazon, that's where I got it from. The further effort, the things like Tarikh-e Hazara, there's the Tarikh-e Peshawar as well, by the way, which is a separate history of Peshawar written in Persian, again by an administrative clerk from the earlier colonial administration. Those bits and pieces require a lot of translation work. The Persian in use in those books is not the everyday Persian spoken today, which makes it even more challenging to translate those works. But to anyone watching, I would just recommend start with Champion of the Khalsa Ji by Vineet Nalwa. You will not be disappointed.
I would like to add in there, for the Gurmukhi readers, I know people who, for Gurmukhi audience who read in Punjabi, they are very fond of books by Prem Singh Hoti Mardan. And he has a book on Hari Singh Nalwa. I have not personally read it. It is on my list. So that's something else to check out as well. Dr. Khanuja, anything you would like to add there?
No, I think whatever Jahandad said, I concur completely.
Yes, the Shehzada speaks. Thank you. So I think we have to, unfortunately, we do have to conclude the presentation today. We are way over time. So I find that, for us to be able to talk about this shared heritage and accept it honestly for all it is remarkable. For us to come together on this stage, and I thank Jahandad Khan and Dr. Khanuja for taking the time to be with us today and sharing these fascinating episodes from history, as well as this unique opportunity to see some of the creative achievements of that period. So I hope all of the audience have also enjoyed the tour as much as we have enjoyed presenting it to you. A huge round of gratitude and thanks to Tanmeet Gujral, the Program Director of the Sikh Foundation, for bringing us all together and making this possible. And also Rajinder Singh, whose support we can always count on, and also for creating the Sikh Foundation app, where you will be able to see some of the artworks that we have shared today. The other artworks from our previous episodes are also available on that application, so we encourage you to download that app on your phones. And a big, big thank you to all of you for joining us from all over the world. We have been very encouraged by your support and attendance, and we do hope to see you again on September 5th on our upcoming show, where we will continue to showcase more Sikh treasures in Pakistan, and this time it will be with Amardeep Singh. Please stay in touch with us on Facebook as the dates are announced for the other shows as well. Until then, stay safe and stay inspired in Chardi Kala. Thank you, everyone.